super excited for this event because I think interviews can make us all nervous, but we're here today. We're going to help you all and make you feel confident. My name is Jessica Pereira. I'm a third-year medical student at Trinity School of Medicine. I'm aspiring to match into plastic surgery. And on behalf of Teach As You Learn, welcome to our interview event tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to get started on our event. All right, so welcome to the interview prep brought to you by Teach As You Learn. Go ahead and go to the next slide, JR. So before we get started, we have some announcements. We want to get you guys up to date on what else we have that is coming up for the rest of the month. So today, of course, we're going to do our interview prep. We also want to let you all know about our MCAT strategy that we have going on August 30th from 6 to 6:45 p.m. We also have the Study With Us sessions also on August 30th. That will be directly after the MCAT strategy from 6:45 to 7:30 p.m. And so this is a good chance for us to all to get together and go ahead and study. And then at the end of this, we'll go ahead and discuss more of the mock interview prep, which you can go ahead and purchase time on the Teach As You Learn website. And as always, follow us on Slack, on the website, on Instagram, and you'll never miss any of the updates. We constantly have really good things going to help you guys, not only just in medical school, but also in pre-med, getting ready for this application season. We know secondaries are out right now. Interviews are about to come around the corner, and we're here to help you. Next slide. So how are we going to do things today? So we're going to go ahead and we're going to discuss types of interviews. We'll discuss, of course, the do's and don'ts, common interview questions, how to prepare, and then probably one of the most anticipated parts of tonight's event is the Q&A with an admissions committee member. And then if time permits, we'll go ahead and try to do the mock interviews and group breakout sessions. Next slide. Before we get going, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists. So as I said, my name is Jessica Pereira. I'm a third-year medical student at Trinity School of Medicine. Let's go ahead in order from left to right. So JR will go next and go ahead and introduce himself really quickly to the rest of the students.
Hey everyone, my name's JR. I'm a fourth-year med student at Mayo.
Alrighty, I guess I'm next. So hey everybody, I'm Noah. I'm a second-year student at Mayo Clinic.
Hi everyone, I'm Juliana. I'm a second year at Tufts.
Hi everyone, I'm Nikki. I'm a first year at UW-Madison.
Hi everyone, I'm Assad. I did 3 semesters of medical school at LECOM, and now I'm taking some time off and doing research.
Hi everyone, my name is Blake. I'm a rising MS2 at University of Michigan Medical School.
And hey y'all, my name is Chris and I go to Eastern Virginia Medical School. I'm a third-year medical student.
Thank you everyone for introducing themselves. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started and we're going to go into our first topic of the day, types of interviews. So what do we expect on interview day? Are these one-on-one sessions? Are these group sections? How does it work? Juliana, will you go ahead and get us familiar? What can we expect on the types of interviews?
Yeah, so there are kind of a lot of different options for the ways that different schools will put their interview together. I think one of the main categories that kind of has a few different structures to it is the traditional interview. So if you guys have ever interviewed for jobs or if you had interviews for college, that's kind of the typical, tell me about yourself, strengths and weaknesses, questions like that. And it's usually, a lot of them are one-on-one with like a faculty member, admissions committee member. And those are more like generic type of questions typically. Sometimes they'll have a little more out there types of questions to kind of have you think on your feet and answer in the moment. But that's one of the big categories kind of from a broader perspective is the traditional interview. And then one of the other big ones is the MMI or the multiple mini interviews. And those are more, there's role-playing scenarios, there are like ethical cases, and instead of sitting down for like half an hour and answering questions with one person like you might in a traditional interview, the MMI is, there are a couple different types, but usually there are different stations. So say you'll have like 8 different stations that are a couple minutes each, and sometimes it'll be you read a case or a scenario before you enter the room, and then for example, if it's an ethical scenario, you'll read that situation, enter the room, and then you'll kind of defend your perspective on that ethical case. And then there can also be some traditional type questions thrown in there. There can be role playing in a more clinical type scenario. There can be like group activities with other applicants. So those kind of run the gamut of a lot of different types of questions within the MMI, but I would say the big two groups are the traditional and the MMI interviews. And then kind of within that, I know we had some questions about closed versus open file interviews. So that's usually referring to the traditional type of interviews, and open file is when the admissions committee member has access to your primary application, your secondary essays. They have all of that information in front of them. And then closed file would be they don't have access to any of that, or they only have some of it. It can be partial. And I know someone had asked kind of the different approach to those two, and honestly, I would say treat them the same. You never want to assume that anyone has read all of your information. A lot of these people are physicians, are professors, are students, have a lot of other things going on, so they might not have read everything about you. So it's always important to kind of give them background info and not just jump into anything. But that's the open versus closed file. And then I know we had also gotten questions about group interviews. So just to touch on that briefly, that can be within MMI, can be within traditional interviews. It just depends on the school. And that's when you might be interviewed with a group of other applicants. And there can be, I had a couple of those that were like part of the interview day. They weren't the whole interview wasn't in a group, but there would be like one section where I was answering questions with fellow applicants. Or in an MMI scenario, there was one where me and a couple other applicants were doing like a scavenger hunt type of thing, and they were assessing like our ability to work as a team. So there are a huge range of different types of interviews, but again, the two big categories I would say are traditional and MMI. And each school is going to be a little bit different, but hopefully we're going to help you guys get set up to tackle any of those options.
Thank you, Juliana. That was great. Do any of the other panelists have anything to say on closed versus opening and how you approached an individual interview as opposed to MMI or group?
I would just second what Juliana was saying, like assume that you like approach closed and open the same way. For the majority of times, what I've heard is that most people are not utilizing things like MCAT scores, GPAs before, so it's kind of trending in the direction of them being more like closed in that respect, and more so just having access to like personal statements and things like that. But again, you may not know that ahead of time, so if you have something on your GPA or MCAT, or you took the MCAT multiple times or whatever, just be prepared to talk about that just in case.
Absolutely, I agree. And especially when they're closed, use that as a time also to highlight the things that are important to you and that aligns with like the institution as well. Don't just think, oh, well, they already read it and then not bring it up. They maybe hadn't read that and didn't know that. So bring that casually into the conversation. Yeah, I did missionary work for this or so and so. Anything else any of the other panelists would like to add before we move on to our next topic?
Yeah.
Right. Go ahead, Blake.
I agree with everything I already said. One thing for open applications, usually by the time you're doing the interview phase, it's been a little while since you've written your application. So just briefly read through it, the night before or whatever, just to kind of get a good idea of what's already been said. And so just to make sure during your interview you don't see anything contradictory that was already written on your application, especially if they already have access to it.
That's very important. That's a good point. And also, this is the time if you've done something else in addition that hasn't been submitted to the school, you can also say, in my spare time, I've also, or since I've sent in my application, I've also been working on this, or if you were like in the process of doing research and you can say, I finally had the chance to present it just a month ago. And so, you know, that's also the time where you can do that as well. So review your application for sure that's really good. Thank you, Juliana, Blake, JR. So our next topic, this is probably one of the most important ones. What are the do's and don'ts during interviews? What should I say? What should I not say? What if I'm asked a difficult question? What's the best way for me to answer it? Is it okay for me to be really honest, but how honest? So Noah, go ahead and tell us, what are the most common things we should know about do's and don'ts for interviews?
Yeah, so hey everybody. So I kind of structured this in a way, I guess, of like 3 key tips, like 1 do and like 1 don't. So my first one is give short and concise answers. Stick to the question that's being asked. As far as time limit, I would say 1 to 3 minutes. 2 is probably a sweet spot. But, you know, it's not the time to be overly verbose and talk about your entire life story. It's really just pretty targeted. Don't be tangential. You know, address the question. Make sure you've addressed every aspect of the question, but it really doesn't need to go beyond that. My next tip would be, we've already mentioned it, but make sure to reread your personal statement and your secondary essays, especially the secondary for that particular school that you're interviewing at. It's one of your key ways that you differentiate yourself for the schools as your secondary, so it's important to brush up on those details and what you wrote about. And I would also encourage to have either extra details or a story that pertains to that same experience that you talked about in your essays, like just so you have something more, so you're not just regurgitating your secondary essays. And definitely don't be unprepared to answer basic or nuanced questions about your application. Let me see. For do, make eye contact. If you're virtual, that means you're looking at the camera and it's really hard. So like what I'm doing is look at the bright green light and you're looking out there, you're not looking at the screen. That's like a really common thing and it can just throw people off. If you do have an in-person interview, and that means looking right at the person in their eyes, and like you don't have to like stare at them, okay, because that's also uncomfortable. Like you can make breaks, but you know, eye contact is it's a social norm, okay, so be normal. As far as another do, be early or on time. I always say to be early is to be on time. So if it's somewhere in person, I would get there 10-15 minutes early. One, like you're gonna have the nerves, find your bathroom, okay, like do what you gotta do, what you need to do. If you're virtual, make sure all your computer is up to date. Make sure that your Zoom client is all good to go, so that you don't have any unnecessary delays and your interviewers are already not pleased with you when you enter the room. Being late is just a bad look. That's just going forward for any interviews and in medicine in general. So fortunately, during the application season, I pretty much experienced every interview type that there was, from MMIs to one-on-one to group interviews. So I can talk a little bit about each of those formats. So for MMIs, specifically about ethical scenarios, I would say that you can buy yourself a little bit of time by summarizing the scenario that was just given to you. So if you're like, I don't really know how to answer this, I need to buy some time, just summarize what was said. And this can be a way that you can kind of think about the issue from all sides before you give your answer. And while I'm on that topic, make sure that you do look at every side of the issue before you speak. So think before you speak. You don't necessarily have to look at every side of the issue in your answer, because they're usually looking for what you think, but you definitely need to make sure that you're thinking about every point. And then once you have an opinion, and this is just my take, but I think you should stick to it. Some of the interviewers will challenge you, and that's normal. It doesn't mean that you're wrong. It just means that they want you to be able to back up your opinion. And you're going to see this in medicine time and time again. You'll be like, oh, I think my differential is this, and they'll push back. And that doesn't mean you have to change your differential. It just means you have to justify your reasoning. For one-on-one interviews, again, reread your application. Sometimes they do provide your interviewer's name and advice, or in advance rather, sorry. So if you can look them up. Sometimes you'll learn something interesting, like their specialty or some areas of research, and you might be able to connect that. It doesn't always present an opportunity, but it can at least put you more at ease if you know who you're going to be talking to in the next couple of days or weeks. And then for a group interview, this is a really unique format. Being with other students, I think it's the most awkward format of them all. So this is just more of like social decorum. Don't talk over other students when they're giving an answer. It's really bad form. Make sure to listen to other students' answers. Sometimes you'll have an opportunity to bounce off whatever people say. Like sometimes if you're stuck, it might ring something in your head if you're just simply paying attention and listening to whatever people are saying. That being said, while you can build off of our students' answers, like don't one-up people. If somebody talks about their volunteer experience and they said I did 100 hours in this, don't be like, oh, I have 200 hours. Like don't do that. It's weird. So that would be my do's and don'ts for the interviews. If you have any questions, make sure to hit me up.
Thank you, Noah. I do want to add too, since we were talking about do's, don'ts, and then also the types of interview, even if you're virtual, dress, business professional, don't, be put together. Ladies, have your hair done. Guys, you don't want to show up looking like you just came back from the grocery store, you just came back from the gym and there was traffic. And this goes back to what Noah was saying, like plan everything on time, whether it's in person or virtual, take it the same way, be professional, dress professional. It says a lot. This is a statement, right? And so if they're interviewing you, they're interested in you, and you can either knock it out of the park and you just secured a seat, or you just did something, or you're late, or you're not dressed up professionally, and it's, and it doesn't look good, especially in the group interview if everybody's dressed up nicely. And then like you just woke up at 7:45, the interview started at 8 a.m. and you're not put together. It shows, you can tell. Have your camera on, have good lighting on the virtual. This goes back to the being early. Set up the lights, make sure everything's working, make sure your laptop's not about to die, have it plugged in the entire time. Even if it's fully charged, I know my computer can be fully charged, 45 minutes later, it's done. Like it's just gone. So little things like that, I think makes a big difference. Anything else, panelists, that we should add to the do's and don'ts?
Oh, also, I will add just real quick. I saw Chris was going to unmute, so I'll let you speak. But the one thing, this also is not the time in your room. If you have decorations or posters in the background, especially something about like politics or something that can even be remotely controversial, take those down if it's in view of your camera, if you're doing a virtual interview, just so you never know the beliefs of the people who you're talking to. So just so you don't, be safe than sorry, and just take it down. So the interview's about you and not about what you had in your room.
Yeah, to even piggyback off of what Noah said, I would say even like if you have, it's okay to have like family pictures, but just anything that could seem distracting, try to make sure you don't have that in your camera, because they just might start focusing on that. But I was also going to add, I guess I was going to kind of talk about this during my part, but as a do make sure you have like questions. Like if they ask you, do you have questions prepared. It doesn't really look good if they ask you if you have questions and you just have zero questions. So try to think about, questions you want to ask the interviewers.
And with that, it's like a double-edged sword. You want to have questions for sure, but make sure it's not something that they expect you to know, or that they think that's a reason you would want to come to the school for as well. So you do look up the school, what are they offering? And then you could say, oh, I saw there's research that's available to students. I would like to know, does that begin as an M1? Do we get to select what type of research? That is good. Don't, for example, they're very big on community service, or like, you know what I mean? Like, don't do something that's like, oh man, you should have known that, or we were hoping that's what we like to see in our students, So research what you're going to ask and how that's going to relate to that school and that program. Anything else, panelists? This is really good information. This is good.
And I'll throw one tip out, just because I know a lot of people try to figure out like how to, like what question should I be asking. I think that's like a common thing that people even think about in applying for residency right now. It's the same exact thing. Like, I need to know what I should be asking people. The best way to figure out like really what to ask is to talk to either residents, for me in this case, or for you guys medical students at the program. If you talk to them, then one, they can actually just give you like good questions to ask. Like, you know, if I'm talking to a medical student and I'm just like, what do you love, what do you hate about this program? And a medical student that you trust, which is everybody in Teach As You Learn, you know, they'll keep it 100, right? And so if they tell you something that they like, oh, I wish that this could be a little better, that's like a perfect question, right? Hey, I was talking to some of the medical students here and it seems like this is something that is concerning to them. What are thoughts about this? Or is there any actions that are being put in place to address this or whatever? Like those are like the deep questions. One is like you're actually invested enough to reach out to medical students. And then two, it's like not a question that you can't get on a website or from something like pretty superficial. So just reach out to people at the program, and then they'll usually also give you like, yeah, if I were you, I would ask about these too. And those are usually good questions too.
That's a really good tip for sure. That's definitely do that, guys. Okay, so like communicate with students from that program. And nowadays, I think it's even easier than like I'm like dating myself now. Then back, I feel like we didn't have as much access as we do now than we did 5-6 years ago when we were going through this process. There's like open houses all the time. So you can find this on every single medical school. They have an Instagram page, they have Twitter pages, they have open houses. So you can go and you can meet students. This is your chance to even ask questions that maybe you don't want to ask in an interview, or be like, I really want to know this before going to this place. A student will tell you the truth, especially in a private setting, as opposed to, you know, when you're at an interview and you got to give, you know, the nice, wholesome, politically correct answer. So that's super key. And then also shows interest. They'll like start to remember, oh, you can bring up, oh, at the interview or the open house 2 weeks ago, this was discussed as a new thing that is potentially going to be integrated into the curriculum. They're like, oh, wow, this student really wants to come here. They came to an open house, they're doing this. So look out for those things too. And that's a great way to connect with students at that program, especially if you're interested in that school. All right, next topic. So we talked about types of interviews. We talked about do's and don'ts. Now we're going to talk about, okay, well, what are they going to ask me? What are the most common types of questions that they're going to ask me? How do I prepare for these? And it's hard. How do I prepare without sounding so rehearsed and I sound like a machine and like I'm memorizing, you know, like a monologue back in English class in high school and you stand up. So like, how do we do that? So this section is going to be led by Nikki and Assad. And so go ahead and take the lead and tell us, what are common interview questions? How do we prepare for this?
Okay, so I would say there are like multiple categories of questions. There's some that you can definitely prepare for, like in advance, and then there's certain questions that, you know, are going to be very random and there's no really correct answer for them. It's more of just, how does the student respond? How do they maintain themselves? How do they think? So I would say some of the golden tier questions that me and Nikki will kind of go through that you can prepare for. And I wouldn't say have a word for word like script, but you should have like a rough outline in your head and how you're going to approach these, because you don't want to sound robotic. You want to be authentic. You want to be yourself. And so as long as you kind of have rehearsed enough to the point where I know these are the points I need to get across and this is how I'm going to do it, I think that's where you can prepare pretty well for these like golden, most commonly asked questions. So I guess the first one would be, tell me about yourself. That's like the most frequent one I got. I can briefly talk about my approach. I kept it like a medium length response for this one. I think certain questions you're going to have a quick response, certain questions you kind of want to elaborate upon. This is one of those where I kind of took a balanced approach. One thing I talked about that wasn't in my application. So my structure was this. I had my like upbringing. My name's Assad. I was born in Pakistan, but I grew up in Orlando, Florida. And then I talked about 3 characteristics that I wanted to portray to them. and then I had a confident way to wrap it up, which I'll talk about in a second. So when I talked about the 3 characteristics, I talked about the characteristic and I gave a very brief elaboration on it, and then I ended with a conclusion. So I said, my friends would describe me as somebody who is very personable, as wherever we go, I'm striking up conversations with strangers. And my friends also see me as a leader, as I'm kind of coordinating what we're going to be doing during the weekends. And lastly, I'm known for being very family oriented, and because of my family, I'm here today, very grateful and excited to answer more questions. So that kind of ending with the confidence of saying like, I'm here, I'm grateful to be here, and I'm excited to answer more questions, I think is it also gives the interview like a sigh of relief. It's like, okay, this guy or girl is very poised, and this hopefully goes smooth. So that's kind of how I approached it. It was 5 sentences when I was done with tell me about yourself. And I don't know if Nikki wants to elaborate or anybody else has any comments.
Yeah, just briefly, for some of the interviews, I heard that depending on different lengths or styles of interviews, it sometimes is beneficial to have a 2-minute, 1 minute and 30-second version of an answer to this question. And then also to what Assad said, this should be a pretty rehearsed answer, but don't sound robotic, and definitely don't have this typed out on your laptop screen and you're reading it word for word to your interviewer, because they can totally tell. But practice this and make sure that you feel very confident in answering this question.
All right, and then I guess the second most commonly asked question would be why medicine? And I think sometimes it can be a 2-part question, so I just want everybody prepared for both case scenarios. It would be why medicine, or it would be why not another profession, or why not another position in healthcare? So again, I took a very balanced approach with this one. I took kind of a holistic approach. I talked about my passions, and then I talked about science and how they were kind of integrated, and then how, as I gained more experience, my passion for medicine grew a lot more. And for the second part, I think it's important to really understand the physician's role in the healthcare team, and that's probably the best way to handle it. For example, they may ask you, why wouldn't you go into nursing? Because nurses spend more time with the patients and they provide a lot more of the care. And you can kind of respond by saying, I want to be involved more in the decision making. And obviously you want to be respectful to all other positions, and make sure you're not condescending, because it's a very team-oriented profession. So you're going to have to communicate. Everybody's integral to the team and important as you go about it. So
Yeah, and then also to just kind of jump on that, there can also be ways where you can kind of personalize this answer as well. So if you have specific interests and specialties that like surgery, where you can take more of an autonomous role, that's a good thing to mention as well. And also research, if you're heavily involved in research or you have that pretty prevalent within your application and you want to continue that into your professional career, that might also be something that you want to touch on as your role as a future physician, and why you see that as a better fit as opposed to nursing or PA school.
Okay, and then the third golden question that I was kind of asked was what. It was kind of framed in different ways, but it was why our school, essentially. So I don't know if Nikki, you want to start with this one or?
Yeah, I think if you haven't heard it at nauseum already, you're going to hear "tell me your story" a million times. But this is a really important one where you need to share who you are and what your story is, and then also what you kind of bring to the table. So if you bring different perspectives, if you have a background, if you're a non-traditional student, what is it that will make you unique and make you beneficial for the education of your peers, as long as the advancement of the institution that you're applying to. So it's really important to just kind of show your uniqueness and also display your story throughout your interview, and maybe touch on parts of your secondary and primary statements as you do that.
Okay, I don't know if I got the order mixed up, but there's like why our school and then why should we take you? So Nikki pretty much answered why should we pick you? Do we have 1,000 other applicants, or obviously a lot more than that? So with the why our school, this comes down to what was already briefly mentioned earlier in the panel, which is you need to be like you need to do heavy research on what the school emphasizes. Some schools are big on primary care and rural medicine. Some schools have other strengths that they kind of tailor, or they are looking for applicants that tailor to what their mission is. So it's kind of important that you understand the school's mission and the kind of the applicant they're looking for.
Yeah, and then do you want to go on to the last question, Assad?
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure it was kind of already addressed earlier, which is, do you have any questions for us? So JR and everybody else already did a great job answering it. I think I want to reemphasize the importance of making sure you're paying attention, you're not on your phone when they're going through the information about their school, because you don't want to get to this question and then you ask something that was already addressed. So you don't want to ask about, community service if they've already extensively discussed that. I kind of had a handful of questions prepared. Mine were kind of more tailored towards mentorship. So if they didn't talk about faculty availability, I asked what kind of systems they have in place with us, connecting us with upperclassmen and keeping us in the loop when we go on our rotations in third and fourth year.
Yeah, I had something similar too. I think it's important to always ask questions that can't necessarily always be explicitly found on a school's website. So I always asked, especially faculty members, what they felt about the environment at the school and how they felt relationships between faculty members and students were like. And kind of, it gives you a good feel too as to what the atmosphere and school environment is like. And you can kind of tell, is this a place that I want to be? Is this a good environment for myself and my learning? So it's kind of a good kill two birds with one stone. You're getting a good answer to your question and also getting a good vibe for the school as well.
That was great. Thank you, Nikki and Assad. I do want to add two things also while we're talking about common interview types. Keep in mind, if you took gap years, be prepared to speak on what you did during those gap years, okay? And that's also something to keep in mind. Should you take a gap year or multiple gap years, you have to do things, right? Like they want to hear what you did, so be prepared to speak about it. They're going to ask you 1 year, 2 years, they want to know the gap years. Another thing is, they're asking us great questions. Why the school, everything's going great. And some of us, we have those experiences, we're nervous. We're like, are they going to ask me about this MCAT? Are they going to ask me about why 3 times, why 4 times? Be prepared to answer that question. I always tell people, they gave you an interview. They like you. There's something about you that they like. They don't hand out interviews to everybody. So keep that in mind. They like you. If that was a deal breaker, you wouldn't have gotten that interview, right? So when you're answering those questions, why did you have to repeat certain courses, or why did you have to repeat the MCAT? My rule of thumb is always start off taking responsibility, okay? Say, I wasn't prepared at the time for XYZ, or if you had a family circumstance, if you had illness, but you said, but I take full responsibility. I have actually seen this, so this is why I'm saying this. Do not say your professor was bad, he wasn't a good teacher, he got 1 tomato on Rotten Tomatoes. You can't say that. I'm pretty sure all of us had professors, they're less than an expired tomato, we know. But you can't say that in the interview. You cannot say, I had a bad orgo professor, so then I just did really badly, or I had a bad Gen Chem experience, it was really his tests and his quizzes weren't fair, and then I just, never. Because in medicine, we always have to take responsibility. If JR and I are working together, something happens, I can't say, well, JR didn't tell me to go check on none of that. I have to say, I apologize. It's my responsibility. That was my patient, or I should have better communicated with JR. It's not JR didn't tell me. Maybe I should have found JR. Maybe I should have communicated better with JR. So keep those things in mind. Be ready to talk about gap years and be ready to talk about whatever you're afraid of being a red flag. Be ready, have an answer for it, but take it with responsibility, with grace, and what you learned throughout that time. Anything else, panelists?
I guess I can just add on about the, do you have any questions for us? And I think a really underrated tip is know your audience. So there are some questions that are more appropriate for like a medical student interviewer. So questions like that might be, what does the class do for fun? What are some of the ways that your class likes to stay together? how do they pair you guys together during clinical activities? Whereas like a resident or physician, you might ask more technical questions about the school's like curriculum, or you might ask them what's the best way to get involved in research, like cold calling, or is there a formal process? So things like that. And like, so a medical student might not know the answer to some questions, and likewise a physician might not know the answer to others. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you, Noah. So we're going to move on to our next topic. So we talked about types of interviews, common interview questions. We did do's and don'ts. Now, how do we prepare for all of this? So now you're starting to think of, okay, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to talk about these things, but like, how do you prepare for it? And Chris will go ahead and take over this section for us.
All right, so I feel like a lot of the things were kind of just touched throughout today, but I'll kind of like touch on things, maybe end up reiterating things. But I think one of the big things is that, you know, obviously practicing. So coming out to events like this, being a part of Teach As You Learn. If you have any like other mentors that you work with, that's great. And so like, you know, for me, like I know I had the opportunity, like I was in grad school and I was applying, so I was able to go practice with people who, you know, professional interviewers or so you have it. If you can get a hold of that, that's fine. If you can't, if you have, whether it's, you know, some like us, like medical students, or someone who has any type of, you know, kind of experience doing interviews and whatnot, just having them ask you questions. If they already know questions, if you can maybe try to print out questions and go through that, so you kind of get a feel of what the interview will be like, how you're feeling, things like that. And again, having them give you feedback and you try to work on that, adjust that. I think doing at least a few will just kind of get you, you know, just understanding how you are, how you respond to certain things, learning how to maybe slow down. I think I saw a question where someone was kind of worried about that, like maybe being nervous or speaking too fast. That's where, like, you know, having interview practice helps. Then the next thing I was gonna talk about was, it was talked about before, but it was like reviewing your application. So that's a big thing. You don't want to have something that contradicts, you know, someone asks you something and you say something that contradicts something that was in your application. So definitely try to review that and make sure you know everything down. Next thing I was gonna say was just like really be yourself. Try to be yourself as much as you can throughout the interview. Really, a school just really wants to see that in the interview. Like when they're deciding to interview you, you're pretty close to getting in the door, but that's a big factor, is that if they don't see you as a good fit, that might be the reason why they don't choose you or choose someone else. And then another big thing for me, I always try to tell people, like, I do a lot of journaling. I've done a lot of journaling throughout my journey. And I kind of recommend that. And you don't have to do it. Not everyone does that, but I think journaling, or if you have like a social media where you post your, you know, life, medical school, things like that. Those are things that you can draw back on, right, you know, maybe the day, the week before your interview, to try to answer questions. And so those were really kind of the things I wanted to touch on. I feel like a lot of the preparation stuff was kind of talked about throughout the night. But if anyone else wants to speak, you know, go for it.
I definitely would like reiterate like doing mock interviews in some capacity, like whether it's doing more of like a formal one. I honestly think doing them with people who don't know you is beneficial, because that best resembles like the actual thing. But even if it's just one of the things where you have to like call up your mom, send her, you know, 20 sample questions and ask her to randomly ask you 5 of them, so you can get the feel of like responding on the, you know, on the dot with 5 random questions or whatever. That's better than nothing. But definitely having practice is going to be crucial. And then, you know, Assad and Nikki did a fantastic job of sharing like the golden questions as you described them. Like, make sure that those are, you're prepared for those, not robotic with them, but prepared. and then just getting prepared with like other things that you may be asked. If you kind of come in, there's going to be some things that are just like, oh, I could not have, planned for that. Like if somebody asked you like, if you had to pick a part of the bicycle to be, what would you be and why? Like, okay, it's like, you can't really plan for it, so you just kind of have to freestyle. And again, when those freestyle questions come up, like there's no right or wrong, but for the ones that you can plan for, there is a right or wrong. And so making sure that you're prepared for those is important. And the types of questions where there is the right and wrong is the ones that Nikki and Assad mentioned, right? Like, tell me about yourself. If it's something that's like way off kilter from who I read in the personal statement, like that's like the wrong answer, like that, then I'm confused. Or, why our school? And if it's something that's like not even related to our school, like, that's a wrong answer. And so for those, you just want to make sure you're prepared for sure.
I want to emphasize practicing with someone as opposed to like, yeah, you can practice by yourself and type up your answers, but like practice speaking out loud and saying it. You might not even realize that you're speaking too fast, or you might feel like you're saying, and my thing for, I used to say, all the time. And finally I was given the advice, just pause. You can take a quick second, pause, think about it, say, that was a good question. Few seconds and then answer, as opposed to me filling that pause with a and then it makes you even more nervous because you're hearing that they're looking back at you. It's okay to just take a quick pause. So practice out loud with somebody so you can actually hear your answers. And I know that like, tell me about yourself sounds easy, but like, think of it. I feel like that's one of the hardest questions to answer is like, tell me about yourself. Cause it's like, I've been living with myself for 28 years and somebody asked me and I'm like, I'm a student, like, so really practice and practice out loud, practice in front of a mirror. And I think it helps a lot. All right, let's go into our next topic, Q&A with an admissions committee member. So we're talking about from our side, how are we going to do things as an interviewee? But like, what are they thinking about us? Is there certain expectations they have of us? What are they specifically looking for in a candidate? JR, take it away. Give us the inside scoop. We want to know.
Awesome. Well, again, a lot of the things have already been mentioned. The panelists definitely know what they're talking about. They were successful pre-medical students, for a reason. And I want to echo everything that they already said. I'm now getting ready to go into my second. I actually already have like interviews lined up for like the real deal thing. And we go through our, list of what we want to be doing and how we want to be evaluating candidates and all that kind of stuff as we prepare for the admission committee, as we prepare as the admission committee. And one of like the biggest things that I know we focus on here, and I know that is a focus anywhere else, is identifying people who you feel like fit the culture of your institution. And so when you are preparing for an interview, you want to make sure that you have a general like prepared state of, I know how I'm going to answer those general questions, right? And I know how I'm going to approach things. But if you need to also make sure that you have a good understanding of like the values, culture, mission statement of the school that you're interviewing. Because if you're able to basically like tie in your answers into things that like kind of will like flip a light switch for me, and it's like, oh, like you mentioned a value that you have, and it definitely resonates with the values that we have. Because as the admission committee, I think it's important to know that we have to be like very aware of what the school's values are. And as we're getting ready to interview students and stuff, like they're refreshing our brains with it so that it's on the forefront of our brains and we know what our school wants to be and looks like and things like that. And so like that's fresh in my mind of, needs of the patient come first, and family oriented, and those kind of things, road travel, people who have like other experience and all these kind of things. And so if you understand that from the school and you understand the school's values, then you'll be able to cater your answers in a way that's like really appealing to the ears in that way. Another thing that I will say is that, at least here, and I think this is still going to be pretty standard, is that interviews will be virtual. And we mentioned a few like keys with that, but I've definitely interviewed people in a virtual setting, and you'd be surprised how frequent people read, like, and don't think that I can see that they're reading. There was like one day when I think I probably interviewed like 4 people and 2 people were reading, and it just like, and they're, you know, and all interviewers are human beings, right? So if I interview 4 people and like 2 of them are reading, like I automatically am just like, the other 2 people are better. You know, even if like the answers, even if they only read for like the tell me about yourself, the one scripted thing, but it's just like something in my mind where I'm just, you know, it's like I didn't like that, and the other 2 people didn't do that. So, you know, I may not actually remember the exact things that all 4 people said, but I remember how I felt in those 4 interviews. And if you do something where it's just like, I didn't like that, you could say, you can have amazing freestyle answers from then on. But I very rarely remember like exact things that are being said, and just more so like a feel that somebody gives me. So another, you know, the feel vibes are, you know, like Noah said, looking into the camera. I'm not doing a good job of this right now. I should be like doing this. So but looking into the camera, there's a few kind of like subtle things that I realized actually make a difference. When people are like talking with their hands over a camera, like it's just, I don't know. I think when you're in a virtual setting, you have to take your like enthusiasm level and like quadruple it to make it normal. And like, you know, I don't have to be doing all of this if we were like in person, but just me doing this and kind of talking with my hands, and now I'm looking into the camera, you probably can get a sense that, you know, I'm probably communicating with you a little better. You may have, you know, been able to, now you're woken up because you weren't when the first 5 minutes of me talking and I wasn't looking at my camera and I was kind of sitting here doing this kind of thing or whatever. So there's just subtle things like that that actually make for a virtual interview. They improve a virtual interview. And so as bad as it sounds, like being able to kind of master how you would be in a virtual setting is going to be important at this point. A few other things that we think about as like an admission committee is you'd be surprised how many times people, so background on at least how we do it here, after you have your interview, you'll probably, if it's a traditional interview, you may have multiple. If it's an MMI, you definitely have multiple. But the people who are evaluating you are not just the people who interviewed you. You'll be presented to the rest of the admission committee. And so if you have a great interview with one person and a so-so interview with another person, like it could either, the so-so could bring the great interviewer down, or the great interviewer could bring him or her back up. And so if you have one bad experience, that does not disqualify you from getting into the school. There's so many times where somebody will rate somebody very high and somebody will rate them very low. And then the person who wants to rate them so high is like so adamant that this is like an incredible human being, that then they not only convince the other person to rate them higher, but they convince the rest of the admission committee to do so. And so I just say that as like a piece of confidence that if you have one bad experience in an interview, especially in an MMI when there's like 8 or whatever rotation rooms or whatever you have to go through, it's not the end of the not the end of the world. And so definitely, if one is not great, brush it off. Don't let it affect you as you go into the other one. And people understand the fact that that happens actually a lot. And a lot of the times, it's funny, in the committee will say like, oh yeah, well, like, were you the first interviewer? And they were like, oh yeah, I was. They were probably nervous because then when they came into me, they were fantastic and they talked about this and this and this and they, you know, whatever. And so brush off kind of bad experiences if you have them. I'll touch on a few things in the chat too. Wait, were all the questions? Have all the questions? I think all the questions have been answered in the chat. I know some of them were, oh, you guys have been doing great. Let's go, panelists. I know one of them was just like, do I need to shave or whatever? And this is, as long as you are like clean cut, you can be clean cut with a beard. You know what I mean? Like, just don't have like, you know, nothing here and just like straight neck hair and like hair coming out here, but like not on this side, or you could be clean. Make sure you're clean in a way that's like presentable, because at the end of the day, medicine is a very like traditional field, and it's a very like, it focuses on the traditional definition of professionalism, and oftentimes that means being in a suit, business formal, with clean face, hair, whatever. And so just understand that, if you're talking to me, I may not notice certain things, but if you're talking to an 80-year-old, man may have different perceptions. So just be aware of that. You don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. What other, like, are there any specific questions that people have related to how the admission committee thinks of us? And the panelists too, if you guys have questions that you think that students may benefit from hearing about, just like what the perspective is from an admission committee member, I'd love to answer them. And if I missed anything in the chat or in the
I wanted
Q&A.
to add to the virtual, be home. Don't go to a coffee shop or, Barnes and Nobles or Starbucks. Make sure you're somewhere where it's quiet, somewhere where your internet is going to be reliable and consistent the entire time as well. And I know we say these things and it might sound like, oh, duh, but we're saying these things because this is like things that people actually do. And also with the eating, JR, I don't know how you feel about this. I don't like, even if it starts at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., I don't like even something as simple as like drinking coffee or anything. I wouldn't do it. I don't know. I don't like when people do that. Don't drink coffee during your interview, even if it's early. If you missed your breakfast, you missed it. You're just going through until the interview's over. Don't eat. Don't get up to go somewhere, to go to the bathroom. Like, stay there, be present.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, it's like, 30 minutes. If you can't just be present for 30 minutes without like shoving your face full of something, I mean, that's like, I can also give, what may be helpful is just like brief descriptions of interviews for me that have been like fantastic, where I'm like table pounding at the admission committee. Like, I will not leave here until everybody rates this person as high as we possibly can. And then experiences where it's just like, yeah, this person, I don't know how this person got an interview here. But in terms of like the table pounding, great interviews, these are usually people that have just like a sense of like enthusiasm and purpose behind them. And it has nothing really to do with their answers. I mean, like, their answers aren't like tangential and they don't go on for long periods of time or whatever, but it's usually like somebody who's just like, I don't know, I just get the sense that they're so like on fire about this. They're so excited. They've done a really good job of transferring the nerves to excitement. The feeling, the physiologic experience is the same, right? But just like some people are able to like take the deep breath and let that like transfer into seeming like it's excitement. And then I think as they get the ball rolling with that, like I start to really feel it. And then it's like I don't know, it's a weird kind of thing. You want every interview to be conversational, but there's some where it's just like they're so excited about a certain topic that they are essentially like steering the ship of the interview. And that's like perfectly fine. For my interviews, like if you're super excited, you want to talk about something, like I want to feed into that because I just like this energy. And so, whether it's like a research thing or an extracurricular or whatever, like if you start to really going like really excited on it and you're not like talking for 10 minutes, and kind of how to be succinct with it, then I can ask follow-ups for it so that I can continue to fuel your fire and, let you keep going without you feeling like you need to take 20 minutes to do something. But for the most part, the people who have done the best for me have been the people who I leave the interview not thinking about like how they answered a specific question or, the whatever. It's just like, I wish that conversation could have gone longer. And the way that has happened is just from like a feel thing. It's just an energy thing. And it's, again, hard to master, especially over Zoom, but that's where the practice comes from. And just like, did you feel a sense of purpose behind the things I was saying? And even if you just ask your friends, neighbors, parents, whatever, like, can I give you tell me about yourself? And you let me know, like, if you felt fire from that, if you felt like you felt my level of energy from that. And then if not, then you just go back to the drawing board and improve from there. But the ones that have definitely left me like, this person, I don't know what's up with them, are ones where answers are too long. I don't know what it is, but it is a common thing too, because everyone in the admission committee here, at least, usually will like, that's like the first thing that they'll say when they're basically trying to convince people not to like rate somebody highly, is just like, oh, this was a long-winded interview. Like that's like how so many of them start when it's just gonna be a bad interview. And so like Noah was saying, you know, you should have the maybe 1 to 3 minutes kind of thing. Like I think Assad mentioned, some of them can be shorter, understanding that like it's the interviewer's responsibility to ask like follow-ups if needed. And so if you are trying to play the game of like steering the interview in a certain way, don't feel like you need to continue to like ramble about something, because I also have like a personal agenda. There's a few questions that I do want to get asked, and the interviewers where I can't even get all the questions asked that I want to, like it's just like, okay, I don't even, those are the ones where it's like, goodness, like I'm looking at the time and it's just, man, you're still talking and I'm waiting for this to be done. And so that's like one of the really, really big, I guess, going to Noah's points of like the don'ts, like just please do not ramble. Don't be tangential. The reading on the screen, honestly, I will say that I've experienced other interviewees or interviewers on the admission committee try to like they had somebody basically read word for word what their tell me about yourself was, and the rest of the interview was so good that when one interviewer was saying like, yeah, I just saw them reading, the other person was like, yeah, they read for me too for that first part, but like the rest of it was so good. And then it's like, yeah, but I don't know if I can like trust them, and then it just gets into a whole kind of thing. So even if you are doing amazing with everything else, just to reiterate, like don't read it, even if it's not really like you're doing anything like wrong, you know, it's still probably hopefully your words, not Chat GPT or something, but it's still just like, I don't know, if there's anything questionable, there's so many other good interviewers and other good applicants that it's like, as unfortunate as it is, it's the one thing. If you do one thing, then it's usually easier to write somebody off just because you have so many amazing people that you have to compare. And so those are, I think, the biggest things. People who have energy and just can kind of like exude that through a camera and through just like the Zoom, or what I think is mostly going to be Zoom nowadays. Those people, I'm just like, they become my friends, right? And so I'm like, oh, I just want to advocate for them. And then other people who are just kind of like dry and then monotone and rambling on for on and on and on and on. Those people, I'm like, they need to, I got time, I got stuff to do with my time, and they're wasting it. And doctors have less time than me. So those would be my biggest, I think, tips. If there's any other questions, anything else that you guys would want me to answer from the perspective of an admission committee member, please let me know. Oh, Q&A's gone.
Also, if you're going to say you're passionate about something, make sure you really are. Don't just say it to say it, because if the interviewer is passionate, like for example, I grew up swimming. So if you come up to me and you're like, I was a competitive swimmer, I'm going to be so excited that you told me that. I'm going to be like, what event did you swim? I swam the 100-meter breaststroke, and I swam the 50-meter butterfly and the 2-meter relay. And then you're going to sit there and you're going to look at me. I'm going to look back at you, and it's a wrap. Like, you know, so if you're going to say you're, because I'm going to be excited, right? Or if you're telling JR I was a track runner and he goes, oh, great. What did you run? And what was your time? And you out here talking about you faster than Usain Bolt, or you're going to say a lie. And because we know what we're talking about, we're like, that don't make no sense. And it's going to go badly. You know, so just yes, you want to make yourself sound good, but you know, if you're not Floyd Mayweather, you're not Floyd Mayweather. Just say, I like to box in my free time. You don't have to say that you're a 9-time champion in boxing. Just say, I'd like to box. It's something I did with my brothers and my dad, but you don't have to go ahead and say you're nationally ranked and you're all this and that, because you might be talking to somebody who really is an expert in that field, and it's going to look so bad.
And we usually will try to pair people with people's personal interests. So, you know, like it's almost like a high chance that if you say like you are, you know, like fluent in a language, or you danced or whatever, or you have all of these other interests that Jessica mentioned, like they may intentionally try to pair you with somebody to make your interview experience better. Because again, we want to make the experience good for you. So we're not like pimping you or trying to make your experience bad, but if you claim big things, there'll probably be somebody else on the other end, like interested to talk about those things. I can talk about a few of these. I've never had too much smiling or being too happy in an interview. Again, I think the virtual setting dampens down emotions by default. And so like by trying to almost go overboard, then you kind of reach a normal. And so, you know, the more that you practice with it too, the more that you'll be able to see. Somebody will be able to tell you like, bro, you were looking kind of crazy. Like you were like this the whole time or something, you know, like they'll let people be able to tell you, but I think it would be very hard to take it to like an extreme in that direction. And then the next question is, as an admission committee member, what do you like to see in gap years? I think the biggest thing is doing something that is related to medicine, that is growing your exposure in the field. And that can come in like any types of directions. So if it's like shadowing, scribing, those kind of things are great. Like I'm actually physically seeing what's going on and that kind of thing. Research is another great way to get exposure in the field. I prefer to see something like that. And then you can have additional things like I coached track and basketball. I did like personal training. Things like that are fine too, but I would not want to see somebody spend their entire year doing something and not have anything related to medicine. I think the most high yield things that you can do, scribing is fantastic because you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of people in terms of like writing notes and understanding that process as a medical student. And you also get the exposure. Research is great because that's going to pay dividends for you down the line when you're applying to residency as well. And it can also help steer your specialty interest. Those things, and then of course like shadowing. I think shadowing you can shadow people you do research with or shadow people that you scribe. I mean, you're basically shadowing by default. So those would be probably the highest yield things, but the list is way more extensive than that. Just as long as you're doing something related to healthcare, volunteer stuff is great. But yeah, that would be my 2 cents on that. Drinking water during the interview, I think is like one of the things like what we were talking about with Jessica. And you can like, if anything, I would just drink water before you start the interview. So then you don't have to worry about it. But, I think in such like a formal setting, if you were in person, I don't think that you would grab like a water bottle, and like start like even bring a water bottle into like the interview. So I would lean towards like, don't have anything, just kind of just be there to be there like this. And how many people usually serve on the admission committee? So it depends. I can only speak for Mayo. So we have, I feel like we usually have like 10 or so medical students, and then probably like 20 or so faculty. And so they're pretty big meetings, pretty big committees. And during the meetings, everybody hopefully is present. So again, at Mayo, there's 2 interviews. So you'll have 2 interviews, but you'll have all 30 people basically assessing your candidacy. But nobody really cares. Like the other 28 people don't really look at your application. They just listen to what the interviewers have to say. And while people are reviewing an applicant, for example, people may be skimming through their, primary application or looking through their letters of rec or their secondary essays. And some people do that. A lot of people just listen because like whatever happens in the interview is really, once you get to the interview part, that's like all that really matters. Your application isn't as important. And the rest of the committee is really just there to try to gauge how they're going to rank you. And the way that it usually works, at least at Mayo, is the 2 people who interview you have like just as much ranking power as like the other 28, for example. And so the people who interview you are basically going to be your advocates and are going to be trying to convince everyone else to rank you whatever they ranked you, basically. And so that's usually how it works. Let me know if there's any more questions with like details about that. I don't know if I know I can't say like exactly how we rank or whatever, but that's like just from a general standpoint how we do it. This is a good one. Sending a follow-up email. This is definitely spaced like listen to or either ask medical students or your interviewer what the policy is. They may say, like, some schools may just say, like, don't send thank yous or anything like that. Listen to that before you do anything else. If there is no information listed, I think a thank you is fine. That's like, some schools value it more than others. For me, I always like it. I like when somebody just will shoot me an interview, like a email afterwards, and just say, like, you know, hey, I had a great time talking about XYZ, whatever. For me, that's like a good, just more communication. If you do that, I recommend doing it like quickly, because I rarely will let it go like to the next day before like pitting in my whatever I rank the student. So, you know, if the reason why you're sending a thank you is to like put somebody in like a good mood about like your interview or something like that, like you want to do it almost like right away, because then like I again, for me, it's not going to change like what the interview was like. But if I just got done with like another like bad interview, and like you were a good interview, I got done with like a bad interview, and you're telling me like thanks, it was good, then now I'm back in like a good mood, and I'm like, oh yeah, like let me type up how amazing this one was, like, you know, whatever. Because so for me it doesn't hurt, but again, it's school dependent. If they don't tell you anything, I probably would, you know. I think it's just a nice thing to do. Let's see. Yeah, you can definitely. So then this question is, can I touch on my current activities like student government or post-bac when answering tell me about yourself? You can definitely do that. I'll answer this last question after, so I'll answer these last two, and then we'll probably get going out of here because it's been a little over an hour. But you can definitely touch on current activities when you are describing kind of like yourself. I think the way that Assad went about his is great. You can go about it and just kind of, I think the tell me about yourself is a way for you to be able to kind of steer the conversation a bit, because the things that you mention will be the only things that I can use to follow up on. So, you know, if there's certain personal characteristics that you have, like what Assad was saying with his like personableness or his leadership and those kind of qualities that I may want to ask a follow-up question on, you know, now he set the stage for me to like, oh, like you mentioned leadership. Tell me more about, you know, other times that you demonstrated leadership, because he mentioned it and it's telling me about himself. So he's basically being able to steer the conversation in that way. Or if you just want to talk about a specific experience that you've done, a specific extracurricular, you know, you could do something like, you know, and one of the things that I found most fulfillment in is doing student government during my gap years. And, you know, this has allowed me to, you know, do XYZ, which I've realized has become a true passion of mine. And then move on to the next thing. You don't need to talk more about it then, but then it opens up the door for me to say, oh, you mentioned student government. When did you get involved in that? And tell me about, you know, are there any things that you've learned during your time with whatever? So when you tell about experiences or characteristics or whatever during your tell me about yourself, it does open up the door for me to ask follow-up. So it's a way for you to kind of navigate that. And then the last question that I'll answer here is it appropriate to ask the interviewer's email at the end of the interview for the thank you note? I think usually they will either give you I always just, in the Zoom chat at the bottom, I always just say like, if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to shoot me an email. So I always just do that by default. I think we're told to do that. So if they don't do that, I think it's definitely fair game. It may be in your like interview welcome information where it has like who's going to be interviewing you and whatever. It's usually, you know, either first name last name at school.edu or whatever, but it's definitely reasonable, you know, to say like, oh, you know, it was great having this interview. Is there any way that I can reach back out to you if any other questions come up? I would probably phrase it like, if any questions come up, instead of like, can I get an email to send you a thank you note? Because you're already saying thank you. Even if the purpose is just to send a thank you note. But yeah, definitely reasonable if they don't do it by default. I think most will. And the last thing, I promise, the last thing that I will say just about the types of questions too is just to be on the lookout for what are called like behavioral style questions. And those are basically questions like Nikki and Assad did perfect for like the key, the golden questions. There's just like, there's another like group of questions like the behavioral style, and this is like the tell me about a time when you did XYZ. And so a lot of schools will try to use like 1 to 2 of those just to try to standardize the process a little bit. And so they usually want interviewers to ask the same like standard questions. We have like, we can kind of make our own questions, but we want to ask the same ones to everyone. So if I come up with a question, like a random, if I did that random, like what part of a bike would you be? Like I would ask that to everybody. And so I would always ask like a behavioral style question. Tell me about a time when, you know, you experienced trouble working in a team and how you navigated overcoming that or something like that. And these basically are just, you know, how you handled it in the past, kind of hints at how you handle it in the future. But just being like prepared with a few stories, and being like a pretty good storyteller, I think could really be helpful for those. And my recommendation is to have like a handful of stories that are really meaningful for you that you can like draw different kind of answers for. So for example, for me, I would use like my experience as like a track athlete to like answer anything. Because that was just what I felt most comfortable with. So if somebody asked me like, tell me about a time that you know, had a tough time in a team environment, it would be track. Or tell me about a time you demonstrated leadership, it'd be track. Or tell me about a time you overcame a challenge, it'd be something with track. And so like I had my central story that I could always like, you know, pull little experiences off of, and something that I felt like I would be able to demonstrate that like enthusiastic, I'm energized about this topic, and I can exude that in a way and also answer your question. So just something to be aware of. Just have a few kind of stories that will be able to be used to answer those behavioral style questions. Those are all the questions that I have. Before I hand it back off to Jessica to finish, I do want to, let's see. Hopefully I can do this. We've created an amazing resource for you guys that's completely free on the website. And basically all you have to do is, I'm trying to actually pull this up so that, here we go. I'm gonna share my screen. I just want everyone here to be aware of this like free download that has all possible questions that you can be asked. Here we go. Can you guys see my screen? Okay, perfect. So if you just go to the homepage of like Teach As You Learn, and you scroll down into our personalized support here, you'll see one of the little buttons is interview prep. If you click interview prep, then you can click on this free interview prep packet. So when you click here, this basically has like, you know, just interview formats, a lot of the things that were discussed, how to kind of do well in these kind of things, general advice, a lot of the things that were discussed, and then just kind of common interview questions broken up into different kind of categories. So this is just a completely free download. I definitely would recommend checking it out. We also were planning on originally doing like mock interviews during this. I want to be courteous of everyone's time. But 2, I don't know if that's actually possible with this webinar format, so I'm gonna have to play around with this. But what I do want to just draw you guys' attention to is that you guys can do mock interviews just through the website here. Again, this is just on the website in the same kind of place that I just showed you guys.
Thank you, JR. So this is it for our interview event. We hoped you took away a lot of key points. We hope you feel a little more comfortable about the interview season that's, you know, well on its way. Thank you to all of our panelists. This was really great. This was good keys and tips, and we spoke from our personal experience. As JR mentioned, sign up for mock interviews if you want to practice with us. Our names are here if you want to specifically choose one of us or any of the other mentors. Keep up with all of our events that are coming up. So make sure you're on Slack, make sure you're seeing the notifications and the events we're posting. Make sure you're following us on Instagram as well. We're posting that. And if you think this is beneficial and this has been helpful, go ahead and send this to your friends. I also want to make note that this event was recorded, so you can also rewatch it later. You can also send it to other friends who weren't able to attend, and they can rewatch this event. We want to thank you all for coming. Thank you, panelists, and thank you, students. Good luck. You can do it. It'll be great. After the first one, you'll feel confident, and sometimes you might think you did so badly and you did really well. So be you. You know, it's normal to be nervous. You'll do great, and we're here to help you. All right, everyone.